All right, here we are in John chapter 1, before the beginning, episode 4. We're already 4 episodes in. We're in verse 14. Hope you've been having as much fun as I am. Hope this fly's been having as much fun as it's having. But all things came into being through him, including that fly. So as much as it irritates us, we got to love it, right? I love it with a fly swatter if I had one, but oh well. All right, John chapter 1, verse 14. We're getting to the crux of the matter now. All right. The Word became flesh. This was the plan from the beginning, that the Word would become flesh. Jesus is not God's contingency plan for what would happen if Adam and Eve fell. Jesus is not the backup plan, like, oh man, we created this perfect paradise, but humanity screwed it all up, so now we got to send Jesus. That's not what's happening in the Gospels. Jesus was plan A. In fact, there wasn't a plan B. Jesus was the only plan from the very beginning. It was predetermined. It was before the foundation of the earth. It was predestined. It was according to God's counsel and will and good pleasure that all things would be summed up in Jesus. Now we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's going to be a lot of getting ahead of ourselves because I'm so excited about this, man. But the Word became flesh. Now notice, I got this one here from a teacher named Baxter Kruger. The Word did not become anthropos, mankind. The Word did not become human. That wouldn't be enough. The Word became flesh. The Word became Sarx. Now, if you're familiar with the Apostle Paul's writings, this fly, man, you know that Sarx is like, he talks about if you're in the flesh, you can't please God. You know, Romans chapter 8. He talks about, some versions translate the sinful nature, but that's a bit too much, if you ask me. But the Word became flesh. Jesus entered headlong into our delusion, darkness, and despair. He came into the darkness. He came into the world. He was born under the law, as Galatians chapter 4, verse 4 said. Made of woman, born under the law, however it says it there. Or born under woman, under the law. And so he came into this world of his people, of the Israelites. And he says, okay, this is the plan. I'm sticking with Abraham. I'm sticking with David. I'm sticking now with Mary. And here's Jesus. And he's going to be the one that's going to tie this whole thing together. But he's not going to just tie it together for his own, John chapter 1, verse 11. He's going to tie it together for the whole world, John chapter 1 and verse 10, because all things, John chapter 1 and verse 3, came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. There's nothing that exists apart from Jesus. There's nothing that's upheld apart from Jesus. All things came into being by him, through him, and for him, as Paul said. And so the Word became flesh. He became Sarx. He entered into our darkness and despair, into the human condition, okay? And he dwelt among us. He tabernacled among us. The message says he moved into the neighborhood. He didn't come to be standoffish and live off in a cave somewhere and kind of observe us for 33 years or whatever. He lived among us. He was born in a manger. He was wrapped in swaddling clothes and, lived among the donkeys and the donkeys and the sheep and the other livestock there. I'm thinking of Manger Babies. If you know that, if you're familiar with the puppet show Manger Babies, then you're a real one for sure. And so he dwelt among us. He lived, he laughed, he cried, he got angry, he got sad, he got happy, he's hopeful, he's in despair. The full range of human emotions was experienced by Jesus. He was tempted in all points like we are, Hebrews says, so that he could comfort those who are tempted. And then he says this in verse 14, and we saw his glory. Now, the word glory is an interesting word, and I've got a note here. Actually, I wrote it down here. Glory is the essential nature and character. They saw Jesus as clearly as you could see somebody. We read that a few videos ago in 1 John chapter 1. That which we've heard, which we touched, which we handled, which we looked upon, they fully experienced the presence of Jesus. They saw his exact nature and character. And his glory wasn't the glory of a king or the glory of a prince or the glory of some earthly ruler. His glory, he says here, as of the only begotten from the Father, and he's full of grace and truth. not a partial measure of grace and truth, not grace sometimes and truth sometimes, but full of grace and full of truth. Now, what is the truth that he has in mind here? Well, he has the truth beats the lie. The truth beats the lie of separation that killed Adam and Eve. We'll get to that in John chapter 8. Full of grace, that's the relationship, the Father, Son, and Spirit. It's always been grace. From before the foundation of the world, it's always been grace. There was never a moment in time that God did not think to himself to be anything other than gracious. That has always been God's default nature, is love, is grace, is mercy. As Paul said about himself, that Jesus demonstrated his perfect patience to him. It's always been grace. If it wasn't grace, we'd go out of existence like that. It's always been grace. He upholds all things by the word of his power. That's great. That's grace right there, right? What Jesus has done here in verse 14 is mind-boggling, because he has taken this relationship face to face with the Father in John chapter 1, and he's put it into a human body. Father, Son, and Spirit dwelling together in human flesh. Every time, get this now, when Jesus went to be baptized by John, the Father and the Spirit are there. When Jesus changes water into wine, John said something about that was pretty cool. In John chapter 2, he says that we saw his glory. You remember that from John chapter 2 in verse 11? The beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Well, the glory that he had is the glory that he had with his Father before time began, is what John chapter 17 says. And it's a glory that he shares in with the Father. In fact, Hebrews chapter 1 says that Jesus is the exact representation of the Father's image. He's the perfect picture of his glory. He's the perfect picture of God's essential nature and character. And he says here, that he became flesh. Don't think that God is distant off somewhere separate from you. Don't think that God has to be accessed through a priest or through a temple or through some kind of holy space or sanctuary. God is here because the Word became flesh. The Word of God means humanity and God dwelling together. When Jesus picked up the woman off the ground who had been cast before him with those angry men who wanted to stone her, he wasn't being a better legalist. Okay, he wasn't being a better legalist than the people that brought her out there to stone her. He was showing the exact nature and character of God. We don't do that here. When Jesus healed the lepers, touched them, God and the Spirit were present. The Father wasn't looking at that going, well, Jesus, I'm glad you took on flesh because I couldn't do that. No, that's what the Father has always done. When Jesus sat at the table with sinners, God wasn't up there thinking, and that's why we made him take on flesh. And I'm sure glad he's getting his hands dirty. I wouldn't want a part of any of that. No, the Father and the Spirit are at the table because the Son was face to face with the Father. That's the whole point of him taking on flesh, was to show us the Father's essential nature and character. Nothing less. In your darkest moment, in the time of your most distress, sickness, pain, suffering, sin, delusion, whatever, the Father was not 1 inch further away from you than he is right now. God is above all, through all, and in all. Now, we're okay with the above all part. Like had Paul stopped there in Ephesians 4:6, God the Father is above all, then we'd be, yes, Paul, there we go. And we're even okay with the through all part, because he said in Acts 17 that he's not far from each one of us. Through him we live and move and have our very being. Okay, we're okay with that. But when he says in all of a sudden we got an issue. All of a sudden we got a problem, because we can't conceive of that, because the darkness cannot comprehend the light. And this fly is getting on my last nerve. But the Word became flesh. And the Father does not do abandonment. In the next video, we're going to keep going in John till we get down to verse 18, and then we will finish that part up and go to our next passage. All right. God bless.